The desert night felt colder than it should have. November 1942, North Africa, Operation Torch. Somewhere in the chaos of America's first real fight against the German war machine, a weapon arrived that nobody knew how to use. The M1 bazooka, fresh off the assembly line, packed in grease and optimism, and delivered to soldiers who'd never seen one fired. General Dwight Eisenhower found out the night before the landings. None of his men had been trained. Not one demonstration, not a single live round through the tube, just crates of rocket launchers and a war that wouldn't wait. Within 72 hours, some of those weapons were in German hands, abandoned in the sand, left behind during panicked retreats, picked up by Wehrmacht soldiers who had no idea what they were holding, but knew enough to send them home. What happened next would become the fastest, most ruthless act of battlefield plagiarism in the history of modern war. The Germans didn't just capture a weapon, they captured an idea, a lightweight tube, a shaped charge rocket, and the ability to kill a tank without dragging a cannon across the battlefield. It was elegant, brutal, and something the Wehrmacht had never seen before. Every American infantry squad could now threaten armor, not with mines or grenades thrown in desperation, but with precision fire at 100 yards. That changed everything. The captured bazookas were crated, shipped across the Mediterranean, and rushed to Kummersdorf proving grounds just south of Berlin, a sprawling test facility where Germany's best weapons minds dissected the machinery of war. Engineers in gray coats gathered around the American tubes like surgeons over an operating table. They fired them, tore them apart, measured every thread and tolerance, and they saw both genius and weakness. The M1 bazooka fired a 60mm rocket. The warhead was small but effective, capable of punching through 75 to 100 millimeters of armor if you hit it just right. The weapon weighed about 15 pounds. A single soldier could carry it. A two-man team could operate it. But the Germans saw the cracks immediately. The ignition system ran on batteries. 4 D cells tucked into a wooden stock. 2 active, 2 spare. On the Eastern Front, that was a death sentence. German soldiers had already learned what Russian winter did to batteries. They froze. They died. And when you squeezed the trigger on a bazooka in sub-zero cold, nothing happened. Moisture was just as bad. Rain, snow, condensation. It all turned the electrical contacts into corroded junk. The second problem was firepower. 60 millimeters wasn't enough. Not against the T-34. Not against the sloped armor that made Soviet tanks so damn hard to kill. The shaped charge warhead would skitter off at shallow angles, leaving nothing but a scorch mark and a very angry tank crew. But the Germans already had a solution. The Raketenwerfer 43 Pupchen, a wheeled anti-tank launcher that fired an 88mm rocket. It was effective. It was also expensive. Nearly 6,000 Reichsmarks per unit, too heavy to move quickly, too costly to mass produce. What if they could take that warhead and fire it from a tube you could carry on your shoulder? The idea was born in the cold, fluorescent light of a proving ground workshop. Germany was about to turn America's weapon against the world. March 1943. Another demonstration at Kummersdorf. This time, the audience wasn't just engineers, Wehrmacht officials, ordnance commanders, men who decided what won battles and what got shelved. They watched as captured American bazookas fired downrange. Then they watched German prototypes, experimental designs, rockets that screamed and roared and punched through steel plate like it was cardboard. The message was clear. The concept worked. The Americans had proven that. Now German engineering would make it unstoppable. Development moved with frightening speed. They ditched the batteries entirely, replaced them with a magneto generator, a spring-loaded firing rod that struck a small dynamo and created an electrical spark. No cold weather failure, no dead batteries in the middle of a firefight. They widened the tube to 88 millimeters, the same diameter as the Pupchen rocket. That meant they could use existing ammunition, existing production lines, and a warhead nearly 50% heavier than the American original. But there was a cost. The German rocket kept burning after it left the tube. For 2 full meters, the motor roared in open air, boosting range and velocity, but creating a backblast that could blind you, burn you, kill you if you weren't careful. Early testers learned fast: one wrong stance, and the exhaust would peel the skin off your face. Soldiers started calling it the Ofenrohr, the stovepipe, because firing it felt like standing behind an open furnace. By July 1943, German documents gave it an official name, the 8.8 cm Raketenpanzerbüchse, a mouthful, so they shortened it RPZB-43. And soon, the Allies would give it a name of their own, Panzerschreck, Tank Terror. Production orders went out across the Reich. 6 major manufacturers, dozens of subcontractors, assembly lines spinning up in factories from Berlin to the Sudetenland, Eisinger Union in Fetzheim, Hassag in Meuselwitz, Gebruder Scheffler in Berlin, Jokel in Freital, Kronprinz in Solingen, Schofield in Werk. Each plant built components: tubes, triggers, sights, rockets. Final assembly happened at multiple sites, a hedge against Allied bombing. If one factory burned, the others kept running. September 8, 1943. A Wehrmacht report noted that the weapon would reach frontline units very soon. By September 30th, the operator's manual was already in print. October 5th, the first shipment, 1,500 launchers, 5,000 rockets. Less than 11 months had passed since the first American bazooka was pulled from the sand in North Africa. Now Germany was producing thousands. The numbers tell the story. Initial contracts called for 382,000 units. Material shortages and relentless Allied bombing cut that down. But by July 1944, Germany had still manufactured 289-151 of the RPZB-54 model, an improved version. The RPZB-54-1 Lazen entered production in December 1944. Another 25,700 units rolled off the line before the war ended. Each Panzerschreck cost 70 Reichsmarks, took 10 man-hours to build. Compare that to a traditional anti-tank gun. The smallest one, the 3.7 cm Pak K35-36, cost over 5,700 Reichsmarks, and it couldn't even scratch a modern tank. A Tiger tank? 300,000 Reichsmarks. For the price of one Tiger, Germany could arm 4,000 soldiers with weapons that could kill a 40-ton Sherman. It was a brutal equation, and it worked. But there's a darker side to this story, a side that doesn't fit neatly into tales of engineering, brilliance, or battlefield innovation. The Panzerschreck was built by slaves. Hassag, one of the largest producers, was also the third largest exploiter of forced labor in Nazi-controlled Europe. By October 1943, over 60,000 people were working for Hassag. More than half of them were prisoners: Jews, Poles, Soviet POWs. 16 camps, 16,000 souls trapped in a system designed to work them to death. At Hassag's facilities in Poland, around 35,000 people died. The records are incomplete. The true number is probably higher. 12-hour shifts, toxic fumes from rocket propellant, beatings for working too slowly, starvation rations, no sanitation. At Schlieffen, a camp producing munitions including Panzerschreck components, between 2,000 and 5,000 women were held at any given time. Average life expectancy, 2 months. On October 12, 1944, an explosion tore through the facility. 96 prisoners died instantly. The production line resumed the next day. These are the hands that built the weapon. These are the lives that paid for German innovation. And history doesn't let us look away from that. Autumn 1943. The first Panzerschrecks reached combat units. Not many at first. Production was still ramping up, but by January 1944, over 21,000 had been issued to frontline troops. Another 39,000 sat in depots. Logistics couldn't keep up with demand. Every German unit wanted them. Eastern Front commanders screamed for priority. Soviet tanks were everywhere, and the old anti-tank rifles weren't cutting it. Magnetic mines required suicidal courage. Bundled grenades were a last resort. But a Panzerschreck? That let you fight armor from 150 meters away. Suddenly, every German strongpoint was a potential tank killer. Soviet armor commanders noticed the shift almost immediately. Where German infantry used to scatter at the sight of a T-34, now they stood their ground, dug in, waited. And when the tanks got close, the hedgerows erupted in smoke and fire. German tactics evolved with terrifying efficiency. Panzerschreck teams dug staggered positions, no more than 115 meters apart, interlocking fields of fire. If a tank avoided one team, it rolled straight into another. The effective range against a moving target was about 100 meters. Against stationary armor, you could reach out to 150, maybe 200 if the gunner was good and the wind was calm. Technical tests, run by both German and Finnish forces, showed what the weapon could do. The RPZB GR 4322 rocket could penetrate 160 millimeters of armor at a 60-degree angle. At a perfect 90-degree hit, it could punch through 230 millimeters. That's nearly 9 inches of solid steel. The rocket traveled at 110 meters per second, faster than the American bazooka's 85. The warhead carried 700 grams of high explosive, triple what the Americans used. It wasn't just an improvement, it was a complete redesign. February 1944 brought another upgrade. The RPZB-54, fitted with a blast shield to protect the gunner from that murderous backblast. It added weight. The launcher went from 925 kilograms to 11, but it also meant you could fire the weapon without burning your face. Off-operators still needed gloves, goggles, and they had to make damn sure nobody was standing. In the danger zone behind them, a cone that stretched 10 to 30 meters. One misplaced soldier, one moment of carelessness, and the backblast would turn a man into a casualty. But for tankers on the receiving end, the Panzerschreck was a nightmare. Western Front, June 1944. The Allies were coming. German forces in Normandy braced for the invasion, and thousands of Panzerschrecks were positioned along the coast. Bunkers, hedgerows, farmhouses. When the landing craft hit the beach, German infantry were ready with rockets. The bocage, that dense, tangled countryside of Normandy, was perfect Panzerschreck country. Short sightlines, heavy cover, endless hiding spots. American tank crews found themselves fighting a ghost war. Every hedge could hide a two-man team, every stone wall, every pile of rubble. And the weapon that their own country had invented was now hunting them. They welded extra armor plates to their Shermans, hung sandbags on the hulls, screened their advances with infantry, but the psychological damage was already done. Tankers knew that any moment, anywhere, a rocket could come streaking out of the shadows. Crew performance dropped. Morale sagged. The Panzerschreck didn't even have to hit you to make you afraid. The weapon spread beyond Germany's borders. Finland bought 1,854 launchers and 18,650 rockets for 200,000 Reichsmarks. Finnish troops used them with devastating effect against Soviet armor, confirming penetration of 100 millimeters of face-hardened steel at 30-degree angles. Hungary received Panzerschrecks for Operation Spring, awakening in March 1945. Germany's last desperate offensive. It failed, but the rockets still burned through Soviet tanks until the ammunition ran out. Allied intelligence watched all of this with grim fascination. A British report from January 1945 noted that Germany had produced nearly 300,000 Panzerschrecks in just 18 months. That was more than the total Allied bazooka production for the entire war. American ordnance experts realized what had happened. The Germans hadn't just copied the bazooka, they'd studied every weakness, fixed every flaw, and built something better. And then the Americans did something smart. They copied it back. The M9 bazooka, introduced in October 1943, used magneto ignition. Just like the Panzerschreck, no more battery problems. The M20 Super Bazooka, developed late in the war, jumped to 3.5 inches. Larger warhead, better penetration. The student had learned from the teacher, and the teacher had learned from the student's mistake. It was reverse engineering, a closed loop of battlefield. Innovation. Production peaked in early 1944. 15,000 Panzerschrecks rolling off the lines every month. Each weapon required components from 32 different subcontractors, steel tubing from one plant, electrical contacts from another, sights, springs, triggers, wooden stocks. It was a logistical spiderweb. And when Allied bombers started hitting German industry, the web began to tear. But even as the system buckled, weapons kept reaching the front. The improved RPZB-54-1, introduced in December 1944, had a shorter tube, better propellant that reduced backblast, refined sights. Orders went out for 48,000 units. Only 25,144 were delivered before Germany surrendered. Engineers even designed prototypes using cardboard tubes impregnated with resin, trying to save steel for tanks and aircraft. None of them entered production, but the fact that they tried shows just how desperate things had become. The cost-effectiveness analysis is staggering. 70 Reichsmarks, 10 work hours versus 5,130 Reichsmarks for the weakest anti-tank gun in the arsenal, versus 300,000 Reichsmarks for a Tiger tank. For the price of one Tiger, you could field 4,285 Panzerschrecks. The math was undeniable, and in a war where Germany was bleeding resources, that math kept the production lines running. Over 2 million rockets were manufactured. The RPZB GRAR 4322 was the standard, a finned, cone-shaped projectile that weighed 3.3 kilograms. They came in wooden crates, 2 per box. Special variants existed for winter and summer. Different propellant formulations to handle temperature extremes. A soldier could carry 5 rockets in a transport frame, but the weight and bulk made you slow, vulnerable. You had to choose mobility or firepower. Most chose firepower. The Panzerschrecks. Influence didn't end in 1945 Belgian company Mar, which had produced them under German license, continued refining the design. In the 1950s, they developed the Blindeside RL-83, using the same basic principles. The Swiss Army adopted derivatives as the 8.3-centimeter Raketenrohrgranatbüchse, keeping updated versions in service through 1980. The concept of a man-portable, shoulder-fired shaped charge launcher became a template, a standard, the foundation for every anti-tank rocket system that followed. Post-war, American ordnance experts wrote reports with a tone of grudging respect. Colonel C.T. Richards, writing in 1946, called the Panzerschreck program history's most successful reverse engineering project. 7 months from initial capture to mass production. The Germans had taken an unfinished American idea and turned it into a mature weapons system, one that exceeded the original in every measurable way. Soviet forces captured thousands of Panzerschrecks during their advance into Germany. Red Army evaluations noted that the German weapon was superior to the American bazookas they'd received through Lend-Lease. The Soviets had initially rejected American bazookas as underpowered. They'd only accepted 3,000 units with minimal ammunition. But the Panzerschreck? Larger warhead, greater penetration, better suited to Soviet tactics. They kept using them well after the war ended. The last documented combat use of wartime, Panzerschrecks, came in 1948. During the Arab-Israeli War, Syrian forces deployed, captured German weapons, from factories in the Reich to battlefields in the Middle East. The weapon had traveled thousands of miles and survived the collapse of the regime that built it. Some examples stayed in Third World arsenals into the 1960s. Long, after newer systems were available, because the design worked, and working weapons don't get thrown away. Technical documentation survived in remarkable detail. The Wehrmacht Manual, published September 30, 1943, covered everything: operation, maintenance, tactics, safety protocols. American intelligence translated captured copies. Their report, dated October 7, 1944, detailed German firing procedures, aiming techniques, engagement distances. These documents reveal something important. Even under the strain of total war, Germany maintained rigorous training standards, but the weapon was dangerous to everyone. German records list operator casualties from backblast injuries, premature detonations, enemy return fire drawn by the weapon's bright launch signature. That 10 to 30 meter danger zone behind the launcher wasn't theoretical. Friendly troops caught in the blast suffered burns, ruptured eardrums, shattered bones. Urban combat made it worse. The backblast would reflect off walls, turning enclosed spaces into kill zones. Firing a Panzerschreck in a confined area was like setting off a shaped charge in a hallway. Everyone paid the price. Comparing the Panzerschreck to its contemporaries shows where it fit in the evolution of anti-tank weapons. The British Piat used a spring-launched spigot mortar. Greater range, less penetration. The American bazooka was lighter, easier to carry, but it couldn't kill the heavy armor Germany was facing. The German Panzerfaust was simpler, cheaper, and single-use. Fire it once, throw it away. The Panzerschreck balanced all these factors. Reusable, powerful, portable enough for infantry, deadly enough to matter. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Manufacturing quality told the story of Germany's collapse. Early production weapons, 1943 vintage, were beautifully made. Precision machined components, tight tolerances, the kind of craftsmanship Germany was known for. By late 1944, things had changed. Simplified production techniques, inferior materials, rough finishes, looser tolerances, but the weapons still worked. Barely. Just enough to keep killing tanks. Captured examples show the degradation clearly. You can see the desperation in the metal itself. The complete infrastructure behind the weapon was staggering. Training facilities across Germany, ammunition depots, repair workshops, distribution networks. Specialized training schools graduated thousands of operators every month. Divisional repair units kept the launchers functional. The logistical commitment matched what Germany devoted to artillery systems. That's how important the Panzerschreck had become. But environmental limits remained. Extreme. Cold made the propellant burn inconsistently. Desert sand jammed the mechanisms. Rain shorted out the ignition. Despite these problems, the basic design was tough. It worked in Arctic Finland and Mediterranean Italy, from the steppes of Russia to the hedgerows of France. That kind of reliability doesn't happen by accident. Allied countermeasures evolved. Tank crews welded extra armor, hung sandbags and spare track links, installed wire mesh screens to defeat shaped charges. Infantry tactics shifted. Riflemen advanced ahead of tanks, suppressing Panzerschreck teams before they could fire. Artillery targeted suspected positions. Mortars dropped smoke to obscure sightlines. But even with all of that, the Panzerschreck remained lethal until the war's last days. German tactical innovation kept pace with Allied countermeasures. Teams learned to target specific weak points: vision blocks, engine compartments, track assemblies. Multiple teams coordinated attacks, hitting tanks from different angles, overwhelming defenses. Urban tactics exploited the weapon's strengths while minimizing exposure. These lessons influenced post-war anti-tank doctrine worldwide. The Panzerschreck wasn't just a weapon. It was a school. Production quality control data survived from several facilities. In 1943, about 95% of weapons met specifications. By late 1944, that dropped to 80%. The main failures: ignition systems and tube integrity. But sheer volume compensated for declining quality. Even if 1 in 5 launchers had problems, there were enough working ones to matter. The economic impact rippled across Germany's war economy: steel, electrical components, chemical production for propellants and explosives. The Panzerschreck consumed resources that could have built other weapons, but the cost-effectiveness justified it. 70 Reichsmarks versus thousands for a traditional gun. In a collapsing economy, that equation made sense. Training programs evolved as the war dragged on. Early courses emphasized accuracy and safety, classroom instruction, range time, proper technique. Later, combat veterans took over the training. They taught what manuals couldn't: survival, camouflage, how to stay alive after you fired. The Wehrmacht published training pamphlets and tactical guides, specifically for Panzerschreck. Operators. Allied intelligence captured and translated them. Those documents, studied decades later by military historians, Almi, show how German anti-tank doctrine evolved under pressure. Supply. Chains grew more complex as production expanded: electrical contacts from one supplier, optical sights from another, steel tubing, wooden stocks. Rocket production required separate facilities for warheads, propellant, final assembly. One disruption anywhere in the chain could halt everything. Strategic bombing targeted this vulnerability, and eventually it worked. The Panzerschreck program demonstrates something historians still study today: rapid military adaptation under extreme pressure. November 1942 to September 1943. Less than a year, from captured enemy weapon to mass production. Germany didn't invent the concept. They stole it, improved it, and deployed it faster than anyone thought possible. The program succeeded because German engineers were pragmatic. They didn't try to reinvent the wheel. They used existing ammunition, existing production lines, existing infrastructure. They adapted instead of innovating from scratch, and in war, adaptation beats perfection. Nearly 300,000 Panzerschrecks produced while fighting on multiple fronts. That reveals something about German industrial resilience, but it also reveals something darker. The weapon emerged from systematic reverse engineering, from slave labor, from a system that valued production over human life. The Panzerschreck didn't just represent technical achievement. It represented ruthless efficiency applied without moral constraint. The historical significance extends beyond the weapon itself. This is a story about technology transfer under combat conditions, about industrial mobilization despite resource constraints, about what happens when you capture an enemy's innovation and turn it into your own. The Panzerschreck proved that battlefield captures could be transformed, quickly, effectively, into mass-produced weapons that changed outcomes. Modern military historians study it as a case study. Successful reverse engineering, rapid product development under wartime pressure, industrial mobilization in a collapsing economy. The timeline from capture to deployment remains impressive even by modern standards. Few weapons programs have moved that fast, especially starting from captured enemy equipment. The complete story holds 3 truths at once: technical innovation, industrial achievement, human tragedy. German engineering deserves recognition for speed and execution. They took a half-baked American design and turned it into something formidable. But tens of thousands of people died making those weapons. Slaves worked to death in camps with names most people will never learn. The Panzerschreck's history includes both remarkable technical success and systematic exploitation. You can't separate them. You can't tell one story without the other. In the end, the Panzerschreck stands as the most successful reverse engineering program in military history. Captured American bazookas transformed into 300,000 improved German weapons in under a year. It proved that military innovation could be borrowed, refined, and mass-produced faster than anyone imagined possible. From the first captures during Operation Torch to the final weapons produced in April 1945, The Panzerschreck represented German industrial capability, applied to desperate necessity. It was a weapon born from defeat, built by slaves and deployed by soldiers who knew the war was lost. But it worked, and in war, that's all that matters. The desert night felt colder than it should have. And somewhere in that North African darkness, a German soldier picked up an American bazooka and set history in motion.